It shows a structure that looks like a massive eye sitting in the middle of the Sahara Desert.
The Sahara has always looked like a suffocating shroud of sand, but 2024 radar scans just revealed that it's actually hiding a lost industrial complex. Beneath the dunes lies the Ahramat Branch, a massive 64-kilometer-long river system that once flowed with sapphire water right past the pyramids. It turns out our history books are based on a map that is 5,000 years out of date. But to see what's actually down there, we had to peel back the Earth using a technology that didn't even exist a few decades ago. The GHOST SAR technology. Imagine for a second that you're standing in the middle of the Sahara, surrounded by nothing but hundreds of miles of bone-dry, suffocating yellow sand. You'd think that what you see is what has always been there, but that is exactly where our eyes have been lying to us for thousands of years. We've been treating the desert like a solid wall, but to a very specific type of satellite, that sand is actually as transparent as a window. This is where we get into the ghost in the machine, which is a high-tech trick called synthetic aperture radar, or SAR for short. According to the team at NASA, this isn't your average camera that just takes a pretty picture of the surface. SAR actually fires microwave pulses down at the Earth, and here is where it gets absolutely wild. When those L-band pulses hit dry sand, they don't stop. They literally keep going, penetrating up to 30 feet deep into the ground before they hit something solid enough to bounce back. It's like having an X-ray for the entire African continent. According to the journal Nature Communications, this penetration happens because dry quartz sand is electrically lossy, meaning it doesn't absorb the radar's energy, allowing the signal to travel through the dunes and reflect off the dense, ancient bedrock beneath. For decades, the military has used this same tech to find hidden tanks or underground bunkers, but recently, we've started using it to find ghosts. And by ghosts, I mean the massive, ancient river systems that used to turn the Sahara into a lush, green paradise. According to a 2026 report in the Economic Times, recent data mapping has revealed that these ghost rivers were so enormous that they once ranked among the 12 largest river systems on the entire planet. Think about that for a second. We aren't just guessing about where the water used to be or looking at some old legends. We are looking at geological X-rays that show us the exact curves of riverbeds that dried up 4,000 years ago. According to Science magazine, researchers using this satellite data found evidence of a massive paleo-drainage system called the Taman Rasset River, which likely carried water from the Atlas Mountains all the way to the Atlantic. This wasn't just a small stream, it was a continental highway that sustained entire civilizations. Now, here's where it gets interesting. If you could see through the ground right now, what's the one thing you'd be most afraid to find? Maybe it's a hidden tunnel, or maybe it's the realization that the ground you're standing on used to be the bottom of a massive lake. According to National Geographic, the African humid period was a time when monsoons pushed deep into the continent, filling massive depressions like Lake Mega Chad, which at its peak was larger than all the North American Great Lakes combined. This means the Sahara wasn't just less dry. It was a thriving, waterlocked world. The uncomfortable truth we have to face here is that our idea of a permanent desert is actually a very recent development in the grand scale of history. The Sahara we see today is just a temporary shroud, and potentially a very short-lived one. According to research from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, this green Sahara cycled in and out of existence every 20,000 years due to shifts in Earth's orbit. We've been looking at a map that is 5,000 years out of date, thinking the pyramids were built in a wasteland when they were actually built on prime waterfront real estate. It makes you realize that what we call impossible is usually just something we haven't seen the right map for yet. Once the radar cleared the dust and we peeled back those 30 feet of sand, we didn't just find water. We found the docking stations and the massive logistics hubs for a project that was never supposed to be possible without modern engines. According to the findings of Professor Eman Ghanim, who led the team that mapped the Ahramat Branch, these structures were positioned specifically to take advantage of the river's high energy flow during the flood season. It's a total shift in how we view ancient engineering. The Ahramat Highway. Once the radar actually managed to strip away the sand, the image that stared back at the researchers was so perfect It was almost eerie. For years, we've been looking at a map of Egypt and seeing 31 different pyramids, including the heavy hitters at Giza, just scattered across the desert like they were dropped from the sky. But when you overlay those sites with the newly discovered Ahramat Branch, everything suddenly snaps into place. It turns out that every single one of those monuments was built right along the edge of this extinct waterway. According to a 2024 report in National Geographic, this wasn't just a tiny creek. It was a massive, deep-water tributary of the Nile that stretched for 64 kilometers, and its name, Ahramat, literally means pyramids in Arabic. Now, here is where it gets interesting for anyone who has ever wondered how on earth they moved millions of tons of rock across a scorched wasteland. The radar data didn't just show a river, it revealed the literal ghosts of an ancient infrastructure. We are talking about sophisticated inlets, basins, and deep-water harbors that were tucked right against the base of the pyramid plateau. According to the full scientific map published in the journal Nature, these pyramids even had dedicated causeways that led directly down to the riverbanks. Think about that for a second, because it changes the entire narrative of impossible labor. This wasn't a story of thousands of people dragging stones through hundreds of miles of suffocating dunes. This was a massive, well-oiled naval operation. The ancient Egyptians were essentially the masters of working smarter, not harder. They didn't build in the middle of a desolate desert. They built at what was likely the busiest, most high-traffic port system in the ancient world. They used the Nile's annual flood cycle to raise the water levels, allowing them to float massive limestone and granite barges right up to the front door of the construction site. It's absolutely wild to realize that the mystery we've been obsessing over for centuries was only a mystery because the river eventually moved 10 kilometers away to the east, leaving the pyramids stranded in the sand like shipwrecks in a dried-up ocean. According to the research led by Professor Iman Ghonim from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, the builders used these harbors as staging areas for a project that lasted decades. You can almost picture the scene. The constant sound of stone on stone, the shouting of workers, and the endless horizon of sapphire water filled with barges. It makes the impossible feel entirely logical. But wait, here's a thought that actually stops you in your tracks. Does knowing they used a massive river to move the stones make the pyramids more or less impressive to you? Does it take away from the magic to realize it was just world-class logistics? Or does the sheer scale of that water-based highway make the Fourth Dynasty seem even more advanced? The uncomfortable truth is that we've been suffering from geographical amnesia. We forgot the river existed, so we invented stories about aliens and levitation to fill the gap, but the physical proof is right there in the bedrock. According to Architectures, the positioning of these pyramids wasn't random or mystical, it was purely functional. They were following the water. It's a complete shift in perspective that turns the Giza Plateau from a graveyard of dust into a thriving waterfront hub. But there was a problem. A river this size doesn't just stop for no reason. It was eventually killed by something much bigger and more relentless than any pharaoh, a phenomenon scientists call the Sahara pump, the 21,000-year pulse. Here's the thing about the Sahara. We've been taught to see it as this eternal, lifeless void, but that is actually one of the biggest illusions in human history. If you could somehow stand in the middle of Giza and fast forward through time, you'd see the desert floor literally breathe. It doesn't just sit there, it pulses. Every 21,000 years, the entire African continent flips like a giant environmental switch, transforming from a suffocating dust bowl into a lush, sapphire-filled savanna teeming with life. Now, here is where it gets really interesting. According to the researchers at the University of Helsinki, this isn't some random weather event. It's actually caused by a celestial wobble in Earth's orbit known as the Milankovitch cycles. Every 21,000 years, the tilt of our planet shifts just enough to change how sunlight hits the northern hemisphere, which effectively pumps the African monsoon deep into the heart of the desert. This means that for the majority of human history, the Sahara was actually a garden, not a wasteland. It has been a green paradise for longer than it has been a desert. Think about that for a second. We think of the Egyptian civilization as this miracle that appeared out of the sand, but according to science, they were actually living through a Goldilocks moment. They caught the tail end of a massive, humid period where the Ahramat Branch was still flowing and the land was still giving. But wait, it gets even weirder because we are starting to see the power of this cycle in our own time. According to NASA's Earth Observatory, in late 2024, an extreme rainfall event actually filled up an ancient dry lakebed in the middle of the Algerian Sahara called Sebka El Mella. It was the first time in nearly 20 years that the lake had held a significant amount of water, and it served as a vivid modern reminder that the Green Sahara isn't just a myth from the past, it's a physical reality that's still waiting under the surface. And get this, researchers like Dr. Edward Armstrong, a climate scientist at the University of Helsinki, have shown that these Green Sahara periods were actually the norm, not the exception. For hundreds of thousands of years, North Africa was dominated by massive river networks and inland seas that made it one of the most habitable places on the planet. But when the Earth's orbit shifts, the monsoon rains retreat and the desert takes everything back. According to the journal Nature Communications, this transition can happen with terrifying speed, sometimes in just a few centuries, which is exactly what happened to the pyramid builders. They were literally watching their highway evaporate in real time. It really makes you wonder if we are currently living at the end of a cycle that we don't fully understand. We've built our entire global infrastructure on the assumption that the world stays exactly as it looks on our current maps, but the Sahara is proof that the ground beneath us is far more temperamental than we'd like to admit. According to a 2024 study in Climate of the Past, the Earth is currently in a dry phase of this cycle, but human-induced climate change might actually be interfering with this 21,000-year pulse in ways we can't predict. Now, here is a question that might sound a bit like science fiction. If the Sahara turns green again in our lifetime because of these shifting cycles, would that be a blessing for the planet, or would it be a global catastrophe that displaces millions of people and ruins our current climate stability? Think about the sheer displacement of weather patterns that would occur if the largest desert on Earth suddenly became a massive carbon sink covered in forests and lakes. It's a staggering thing to consider when you realize that the permanent desert is actually just a very recent and potentially temporary event in the grand scale of things. According to the Smithsonian Magazine, early humans used these green corridors to migrate out of Africa, meaning we owe our very existence as a global species to the fact that the Sahara isn't always a desert. The uncomfortable truth is that we call the pyramids impossible because we've forgotten the world they were actually built in. We are looking at them through the lens of a dry, suffocating present, ignoring the fact that the environment itself provided the opportunity for greatness. But while the radar and the orbital math gave us the where and the why, it was a single man's logbook that finally gave us the names and the stories of the people who actually used that river. According to the papyri found at Wadi al-Jarf, the Egyptians didn't see themselves as fighting against nature. They were moving in perfect harmony with it. The environment provided the stage, but the players were human beings with a deadline and a deep understanding of a world that was already starting to disappear. The inspector's evidence. So we finally have the road, that massive ghost river beneath the sand. But a road is just an empty path until you find the person who actually drove on it. In 2013, archaeologists were exploring a remote limestone cave at Wadi al-Jarf near the Red Sea when they stumbled upon something that shouldn't have survived 4,500 years. It was a collection of papyrus scrolls, and among them was the Diary of Mera, which is actually the only first-hand account of the Great Pyramid's construction ever discovered. This isn't some mystical religious text or a pharaoh's propaganda. It's a gritty, day-to-day logistics ledger written by a middle manager named Mera, who was leading a crew of about 200 elite sailors. According to the research files at Facts and Details, this team was stationed at a specialized port on the Red Sea before being deployed to the Nile to handle the most critical phase of the pyramid project. Here is where the radar data and the archaeology really start to pull the curtain back on the how. By cross-referencing Mera's specific daily logs with the GPS coordinates and satellite data of the Ahramat Branch, the whole operation transforms from a mystery into a high-stakes corporate deadline. Mira describes, in tedious detail, how his crew would load up massive blocks of fine Chura limestone and then sail them downriver to the Giza Plateau. According to a 2024 logistics study published in ResearchGate, these records show a level of timekeeping at Akhet Khufu, the horizon of Khufu, that feels almost uncomfortably modern. Mira wasn't just guessing when to leave, he was timing his deliveries to the exact day to ensure the construction crews never ran out of material. When you look at the dates he recorded, they align perfectly with the high flood season of the Nile, confirming that they were using the river's peak power to float these multi-ton stones directly into the harbors that the radar just recently rediscovered. It's a level of synchronization that was basically modern. These weren't unorganized masses or forced laborers being whipped into submission. Mira's logs show that these were highly paid, specialized logistics experts who were eating well and being managed with extreme bureaucratic precision. According to the maritime evidence found at Wadi al-Jaf, his team was even provided with high-quality rations and imported copper tools, proving they were treated like the special forces of the construction world. Think about the most complex project you've ever had to manage in your life, whether it was a business launch or just a chaotic move. Now imagine trying to coordinate that same level of detail with 20,000 people and absolutely zero computers. Mira managed 200 men with nothing but papyrus and a boat, and his records show he didn't miss a single beat. Could you honestly do his job today without a smartphone or a spreadsheet? It's mind-blowing when you realize that the state machine of ancient Egypt functioned exactly like a modern-day logistics firm, just with water instead of trucks. The uncomfortable truth here is that we kept looking for aliens or magic because we didn't want to admit that humans are capable of this kind of staggering precision when they have a functioning river and a centralized economy. We've spent centuries mythologizing the pyramids, but Mira's ledger proves that they were built by guys who were just trying to hit their quarterly targets and make sure the limestone arrived on time. According to the research by Pierre Tallet, the lead archaeologist who discovered the papyri, this diary is the final nail in the coffin for the conspiracy theories. It's the smoking gun that proves the river wasn't just a geographical feature, it was the lifeblood of a system that was more modern in its logistics than most 18th century empires. When you combine the radar that found the road, the orbital cycles that explained the climate, and the diaries that found the driver, you're left with one final, shocking revelation about our future. Here's the thing, we've been looking at the pyramids as a static monument to the past, but they are actually a dynamic record of what happens when a civilization perfectly aligns itself with its environment. But that alignment is a double-edged sword. If your entire empire is built on the back of a ghost that eventually vanishes, what happens when the water stops flowing? The system was perfect, but the planet had other plans. The Sahara's impossible pyramids were actually waterfront hubs. Radar revealed a lost 64-kilometer river that Mira's crew used as a massive highway. Now, what will the sand reveal next?